This is the Voyage Report podcast, where you get the scoop on travel. Now, the editor-in-chief of the Voyage Report, Mark Albert.
Greetings, fellow travelers, and welcome. We all love to save money when we travel, right? It helps us see more of the world for less money. Today, we're going to talk to the man who writes the Frugal Traveler column for the New York Times, Lucas Peterson. Lucas joins us today via Skype from Los Angeles. Lucas, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, thanks for having me.
We're so great to talk to you. Can't wait to get into all of it. And first, I have to ask you the question we ask everybody, which is, what has been the biggest discovery that you've had while traveling?
You know, I'm on the road a lot. I would say probably that solo travel is different than I thought it would be. I travel alone a lot. You know, I'm traveling for work, and I think maybe in my mind, I have this sort of romantic notion of discovering all these places solo and having a really great time, which happens a lot. But I think also, like, say, going to the movies alone and going out to eat alone, there are sort of limits to the joy sometimes, and sometimes it's really nice to have, like, to be able to share things that you discover with other people. So I think the thing I've discovered is that sometimes I get a little bit lonely. Like, not that it isn't still great and and eye-opening and you know, not that I don't love my job, because I really do, but that sometimes, yeah. So I think maybe that me personally, like, I'm a little bit more of a social creature. It would be nice to like turn to someone and be like, oh, like, wow, look, isn't that neat? You know what I mean?
You like sharing experiences with people at the time.
I think so. I think I do. I think if it were me traveling for myself, you know, me traveling and not professionally, yeah, I think I would bring a friend.
Fantastic. Well, sharing on the road with a good friend is always a great idea. And what's the favorite place that you've been to of all of your travels? I know you've been all over the place.
I'm going to go with a place that I traveled to as a college student. So this was pre-travel writing, but I got to spend some time in Syria in 1999.
Wow.
Or 2000, and it was even when I was there, I really thought it was a special place, and really warm people, beautiful country, rich, deep history. You know, Damascus, Aleppo, these cities that are thousands of years old. And it was interesting because we'd just come from Jordan, so it was a school trip where we spent a month in Jordan and Syria, and in Jordan, you know, Jordan's great, but Jordan is also very new. Jordan is a relatively new country, and Amman is a relatively new city, and doesn't have, you know, just the history and you can just feel it. You know, you walk down the streets in Syria, and, you know, the buildings are sort of, you know, collapsing in on each other, and everything is sort of just fantastic and old and decrepit, and I truly loved it. And it's so sad to think that probably, you know, in our lifetimes, we'll never be able to go back, you know, and or it certainly won't be the same. And so that's sort of sobering, but I loved traveling to Syria.
Well, I wish I could take your recommendation or recommend it to all of our listeners. I think right now it's a little unsafe, and that is sad, and that's unfortunate. We just put up, one of our contributors just put up a video on our site, voyagereport.com, about Jordan, and that's another place that's on my bucket list that I've got to get to.
It is beautiful, especially when you get, I would recommend getting out of the cities, and the desert is so spectacular. You know, the Wadi Rum, and especially Petra, which everybody knows. But it is absolutely breathtaking.
What's the next place that you're traveling to?
You know, I think South Africa. I don't know. I'm gonna put an I don't know, because I just got back from a trip, so I don't plan it super far ahead of time. I sort of have a loose schedule in my head that I discuss with my editors, of course. But it's not like I lay out a year of travel or even 6 months of travel ahead of time. A lot of it, because sometimes things come up.
Yeah.
Sometimes the Times is, they will be doing a special issue on something and they'll want to send me somewhere. So it's, they like to have the flexibility. I also sort of enjoy having the flexibility as well. Like they did last year, they did a theme park issue or something like that, and they said, okay, we need you to go to Dollywood.
I'm sure that was on your top 10 list, right?
And so, well, I'd never even thought. I was like, oh, okay, let me Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. And then, so I went to Dollywood and I ate all this food and I went and saw this show where there's, people jumping, riding horses, jumping through flaming hoops and running buffalo around an arena. I forget the name of the show, but it was amazing. And yeah, I had a great time. So I think sub-Saharan Africa. I'm pretty sure. I don't know exactly what it's going to involve. My predecessor, guy who wrote the column before me, Seth Kugel, I think he did like a frugal safari at some point. So I'm going to have to maybe think about the angle, but I think that's probably what it'll be.
Well, I really loved Cape Town, and let's see, we rented bikes, I think, and we biked to the Cape of Good Hope, which is just about as far south on the continent as you can get, and it was just spectacular and gorgeous, so I don't think you can go wrong. The sub-headline of the Frugal Traveler column is Tips for How to Navigate the World on a Tight Budget, and another phrase I've noticed you use from time to time, seeking out high style on a low budget. So we're going to, of course, ask you for your tips on traveling on a budget and tips for travelers. But first, how did you start writing this column? You said that you had a predecessor, so how did you start? I mean, were you a 5-year-old that started clipping coupons and it's just in your blood, or what?
Well, sort of. I think I was definitely raised in a frugally minded, good Midwestern home. I grew up outside of Chicago, and I certainly, from a young age, was very interested in like coupons and deals. Yeah, that's definitely true. I wouldn't say it was like something that overwhelmed me, but it's definitely something that I've always really loved. And today, and then, in sort of the credit card era, becoming very obsessed with like miles and points, and that is also like something of a hobby. And so I mean, as for the job itself, obviously I haven't had the job since I was a child because that would be crazy. There was a guy, Seth Kugel, did the job before me. He wrote it for like 5 years. I mean, the column has existed for a long time, because then before him there was a guy named Matt Gross. There's a woman named Dazanne McLean before her. There's a woman named Susan Spano, and I think even going back into the 90s, I want to say like Eric Asimov wrote the odd Frugal Traveler column. Like I think the column has existed for 20 years at least.
Wow.
So I'm just sort of taking up the mantle and just kind of running with it.
Well, that's interesting that you say that, the history of this column, because I was going to ask you whether you felt as though people have always tried to look for great travel deals, or whether you think that's become more intense recently after our Great Recession and all of that.
I mean, I think people have always looked for ways to travel cheaply, and certainly since 2009. I think, and today, but what's so funny about it today, it's not funny, but I think what's notable about it is that travel is very inexpensive. I mean, air travel is very inexpensive, certainly compared to what airfares used to be, and it's much more accessible. And I think part of the joy of the job is to sort of let people know that you can score that, round trip fare to Europe for $300 something sometimes. And I think people are really shocked by the fare wars between and sort of these new discount carriers. So it's nice to see, I think people have, international travel particularly, people have tended to think of it as something of a luxury product, which it is, but not to the extent I think that a lot of people think it is.
Right. You mentioned the low-cost carriers like Norwegian that have certainly put down pressure on those airfares from the legacy carriers. And, when I talk to people, too, everyone thinks you have to spend $1,500 per ticket and all of this stuff to go to Europe or something. And it's really incredible, the fares that we've been seeing in the last year or two.
I completely agree with Norwegian, with WOW, with I'm trying to think of some other ones that fly to LA.
Isn't there a new
TAP.
Level is a new one, right?
Right. Is that the British Airways one?
Yeah, out of I think San Francisco. I'm not sure about LA.
Yeah, and combine that with the current exchange rate, with the euro and with the pound. It's there's really no better time to go. Summer to Europe is never going to be cheap, but certainly relatively, and once you get into early fall, the prices are just so ridiculously low. And I was talking to my cousin, my college-aged cousin, a little while ago, and I was trying to get her to come on this trip with me. I was just like, come with me to the Dominican. I was trying to get her to come to the Dominican Republic with me, and she's like, I can't, I don't have any money. And then she, in the same breath, she turns around and tells me she just spent $300 on sunglasses. And I was like, okay,
exactly.
You can't, you could have the money. You're just choosing not to have the money because you're putting other things priority. You're prioritizing it, which is fine. But I think it's just important to acknowledge that, yes, many people, even working class, middle class people can afford that trip. You just have to make it a priority.
Exactly. And at voyagereport.com, listeners, of course, we've got the Dealwire, which has a curated feed of deals, and that's where I found $462 to Budapest in December over the holidays. The Christmas markets were just fantastic there, and $471 to Paris, and just a whole lot of these low fares that you couldn't even think of maybe 10 years ago, but because of all that competition, and obviously there is a State Department travel alert right now for Europe, so you have to be aware of that, but really some opportunities that people haven't had before. So Lucas, where do you pick where to visit? You mentioned talking with your editors about that. How does the pitch process work?
A lot of it is, it's a combination of things. It's a combination of a couple of things. Places I want to go, places where they have recently covered, which is a big one, because obviously if they just have a cover story on Stockholm, I'm not going to go to Stockholm. And then it also, occasionally, my editor will have an idea. Why don't you go here? And then it's also what is it? Then it also is what's the price? And then it's also, does it make sense for the column? Because certain places make more or less sense. They will occasionally I think it's more fun for readers sometimes to put me in a place like Stockholm or Oslo, someplace that's famously expensive, and try to do that country cheaply. There's something slightly, I don't know. It's if I were to go to a third world country and sort of do that country on the cheap, that there's something slightly maybe problematic with that. So I think generally what they like to do with the column is put me in a situation where I have to sort of figure out how to do a country cheaply, generally speaking. But but anywhere is fair game. So it's just sort of a combination of those factors, but primarily, where I want to go, where they want to go, and then where they've recently written about.
You've covered a wide array of stories, and I want to read some of your recent headlines. We've got beer on a budget in San Diego, partying in South Beach like it's $19.99. That's $19.99. Built on Steel Pittsburgh now thrives on culture. We've got which travel search site is best? Everyone always asks that question, right?
Yes.
Conquering Machu Picchu, the cheap and quick way. How to make the most of your credit card points, which you mentioned you've been a longtime fan of doing that. And California's Galapagos. All of your articles I found are very conversational. Who are you speaking to?
Oh, well, I mean, I guess just the casual travel enthusiast. I mean, you do have to sort of write it for the Times audience and sort of in that Times voice, which is not typical. It's a little bit, I don't know. I don't want to say, I'm certainly not going to be, as opposed to some other freelance writing that I do, I'm not going to be sort of dropping F-bombs left and right in my Times column, because that's that's not really going to fly. So I would say less casual, but also just generally for anyone who's looking for, like it says in the little tagline, seeking out high style on a low budget. People who want to still have a good experience, have a comfortable experience, who maybe, but don't want to spend a ton of money. And it doesn't mean sleeping on a floor somewhere and, waking up covered in bites and your back is killing you. Like that's not what inexpensive travel, frugal travel, that's not what that has to be. Of course, there is always a way to do it cheaper, and it's not like, I think that's what I'm trying to emphasize, is it's not about doing it as cheaply as possible, because you can always do that, and sometimes you are sort of cutting off your nose to spite your face when you decide to save a couple extra dollars, especially in a lot of countries where the dollar can go a pretty long way. And you can still, for a reasonable sum of money, have a great experience. But then, I'll get comments like, you mentioned my Machu Picchu article, and, someone wrote to me like, how could you spend $150 going to Machu Picchu? When you could just walk. And my response was like, yeah, you could walk on active train tracks for 8 hours,
right,
to Machu Picchu, and that would be free. But then that's what that's each way. So you're doing this sort of dangerous thing for 16-hour walk round trip. Like, that's not for everyone, and that's not how I want to spend my time. For still a reasonable sum of money, you can have a more enjoyable experience. So there's always a way to do it more cheaply. There's always a hostel that's going to be cheaper in the place, and there's always, a way to cut corners. But at some point, you have to start thinking about your comfort and about sort of what the value of what you're getting, because frequently, I think when you go for the bottom of the barrel, as far as travel, as far as hotels, it's not always worth it. So frugal doesn't always have to mean cheap, I guess is what I'm saying.
Right. Well, and the way I look at it is, you only have so many limited days, whether you're in Machu Picchu or Cusco or Lima or Paris, and how are you going to spend those days? Are you going to spend it 16 hours walking on the train tracks, or do you want to pay the $40 to take the train ride, or whatever it happens to be? I mean, you sort of have to weigh that balance, I think.
I completely agree. It's about, and it's also one thing if you're, 20 years old, and it's another thing if you're 50 years old. It's like your tolerance for certain things kind of evolves as a traveler as you get older, and you may not be willing to sleep on a floor and get bitten by insects. You may, and when for just a little bit more money you can have a much better experience.
So Lucas, when you sit down to write one of these articles, one of these columns, is your goal for the reader who may never go but wants to live vicariously through you, or is it to give a roadmap to somebody who says, you know what, hey, he really showed me that I can do this on my budget. Yeah, I'm going to take this article and column and I'm going to plan my trip with it.
It's a mix. It's sort of a strange hybrid column because there are service elements to it. You have in the Times the popular 36 hours column, which they do a lot, and they do of different places, and which is extremely useful because it acts in a lot of ways as a roadmap. I can go to this place, this place, this place. Here's a long list of places that I can go to, as opposed to sort of travelogue-y writing. The mists of the Amazon bathed my face as I trekked through the jungle, and I thought to myself, what am I? And so what I get to do a little bit of both of that, which is nice, which makes it interesting and also more of a challenge, because it is, what I write is first person, and it is a bit more experiential. And I can sort of dot it with personal experiences, interactions I have with people on the road. But they're also, because it is the Frugal Traveler, I am also required to have some practical, useful things in it. I went to this place, and this cost this amount of money. So I would say it's a combination. It's sort of a trying to sort of give the reader a sense of time and place, a sense of what it is like to be in a place, but also some practical, usable information as well.
And I know that you mentioned you get comments from readers. Do they send you tips, though, and request, hey, I want to see you go to this country, I want to see you go here, or I'm thinking of a trip in 6 months to this place. Could you go there before me and plan it out for me?
Very rarely. Not.
Interesting.
Yeah, I will. Yeah, almost never will someone say. I mean, I get pitches from PR people, but very rarely from readers will they say, "Hey, why don't you go here? This is really." I mean, I would love that. I don't know. I don't know.
All right, listeners.
I don't know why they don't do it.
Listeners, you heard it there from Lucas here. He wants your suggestions, so there you go.
I love it. I love suggestions. I mean, and sometimes I know when I go to a place, I will get on Twitter from the Frugal Traveler account @Frugal Traveler, and I will say, "Hey, Pittsburgh, like I'm here. What's up? What can I do?" And then people are wonderful, and I will get a ton of useful suggestions. But yeah, it really depends.
Crowdsourcing tips. I love that.
It's extremely useful. It really is. I don't do it all the time because it's like a little bit cheating, but I do it sometimes, and it's awesome.
Now let's talk about the part of your job that I am actually pretty jealous about. You are the host of Dining on a Dime series on Eater. What is the premise of the series for those who have never seen it and never heard of it?
I mean, the basic premise is inexpensive food. That's it. Inexpensive food that skews casual, skews I hesitate to use the word ethnic because it doesn't mean anything, but ethnic food from traditional, from immigrant cultures, cultural minorities, and that's relatively cheap. I mean, it's $10, but we stretch that sometimes depending. But but casual places, not fancy sit-down places. So stuff that's on the street, really anything is fair game. But we've gone into, people serving pupusas out of their backyards and trailers on the street serving Taiwanese food, and to regular formal restaurants, to farmers markets, to street festivals, like a Jamaican food street festival, to really anything. But generally less expensive, more casual.
One of your episodes is called The Enormous Italian Sandwich You Have to Eat in San Francisco. Listeners, it has 175,233 views as of our podcast. Lucas, let's listen to a short clip and we'll talk about it.
We have the classic Little Luca combo. So why don't we have an unveiling ceremony? You know, if you can see through the paper, that it's going to be good. Oh, it's just so beautiful. I'm so proud. I know what a parent feels like now. Look at this thing. It's so beautiful. That is the tri-tip. This is the 3 meat. You ready for some NC-17? Oh yeah. My beautiful baby boy. I shall name you Lucas Jr. I shall name you Lucas III. I shall name you Lucy. My daughter. Oh, yes. Even one more beautiful than the last. You make me feel like a natural Lucas.
Those were huge sandwiches, and I love the enthusiasm you brought to it. It's like you almost worship the food that's brought in front of you.
I mean, they're really good. You got to go. It's the perfect. Little Lucas is the perfect place going to and from San Francisco airport, because it's in South San Francisco, super close to the airport, so it's very easy to stop in. I love it.
And where do you get the ideas for where to go? Are these your editor, your producer, you're coming up with them?
Oh, well, it's a mix. We have a really fantastic team at Eater, and a lot of cities like San Francisco have city editors. So the crew at Eater San Francisco or the crew at Eater New York or Eater Los Angeles people who live in the cities and are on the ground, since I don't live in San Francisco. But sometimes, like Little Luca's, I brought to the table because I learned about that place from a couple of friends of mine. So that place was my suggestion. But it's a mix of people on the video team and the editorial teams from the different cities pitching different ideas.
And it's season 9 now, I think?
I think that we just finished that and we're moving into season 10. Wow. And then we're going to start shooting season 11 pretty soon.
Listeners, you can subscribe to Eater on YouTube. Lucas, what episode do you know has gotten the most views, or what was your favorite one?
I want to say there's a torta one that's got a lot, maybe 500,000 or 600,000. There's a Filipino one in the South Bay that has a lot, close to around 500,000. There's a Somali food one that's around the same. So yeah, around 500,000-600,000 views for a bunch of those.
Now you're in Los Angeles. I'm from Los Angeles. Have you ever reviewed In-N-Out burgers? I'm kind of kidding here, but I love that so much. It reminds me of my childhood. I hold it dearer.
I love In-N-Out, but In-N-Out won't let you shoot there.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, they're super tight, super locked down. I mean, as you know, it's privately held. It's owned by one family, and they are. I think Bourdain did a video for Eater. This would have been a while ago, but they wouldn't let him film.
Wow.
And so he just went through the drive-thru. He went through the drive-thru. He just ate the burger outside of the In-N-Out and sort of talked about it. But yeah, they are super tightly controlled. They will not let you shoot.
Have there been other restaurants or eateries that you've tried to get in that said, "Hey, no way"?
Happens all the time.
Well,
and
really?
It breaks my. Oh yeah, constantly.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, because not every restaurant in the world has heard of Eater. I mean, Eater is certainly a major player in United States, the U.S. restaurant world, but it's also among more established restaurants. So a lot of the places I go to are sometimes cheaper, family-owned, from an immigrant family. And those, the people that own those businesses in particular, they're frequently like, "Who are you?" And they're also very wary of cameras, because they just don't like. They're just like, "What? Like what?" They don't understand foodie culture, which makes sense because it's weird. It's weird, but they're also like, why do you want to come in here and put a camera on this food? Like, it's just food.
Wow.
And you sort of have to explain, like, well, we're doing a food show. And they're like, food show? You're like, yeah, people want to people really love food and want to see it on camera. And you sort of see them thinking like, okay, it's a very different understanding of food. I think modern food media and food culture is sort of, for better or worse, sort of twisted food into this thing to be looked at, and which can be great in some ways, and it allows me to do the show that I do. But I think for a lot of people in a lot of cultures, it doesn't quite make sense yet. They think of it as, oh, this is food I make because I want to feed my family, and it's not clear why you want to bring a camera crew into their tiny little kitchen. So we get plenty of those. Long story short, yeah.
This is so surprising to me. Maybe I shouldn't be surprised, but when you mentioned about people saying, why do you want to do this? I mean, there's this whole now Instagram culture about food and dining. I mean, I worked at CBS for 3 years, and I remember doing we did a story, I want to say 2015, 2016, at restaurants, and how chefs were saying that has sort of influenced how they prepare a dish. I mean, one of our first podcasts, we had a culinary chef who travels the world, working from restaurant to restaurant, and he said the Instagram culture has changed how he will prepare a dish visually. And so it just surprises me that a restaurant wouldn't be aware of that or wouldn't want you to capitalize on that.
Yeah, it really has changed food culture in restaurants. It changes how restaurants plate dishes. It changes even down to the lighting in a restaurant. Mm. If a place is too dark, people aren't going to be able to take those photos of food. And it really has influenced restaurants on every level, Instagram and food blogs. But not a lot of the places that I go to. A lot of the places that they're still like, we don't know, we don't care. And
wow.
It really broke my heart because my favorite place in Chicago, which is still my favorite place, even though I'm a little bit upset with them, it is an Italian beef place. It's a beef place, a sandwich place called Johnny's Beef in Elmwood Park. Since I was a kid, they're my favorite place in the world. I went there when we shot in Chicago. I just begged them. I was like, please, I have to shoot here. I love this place so much. And in the end, they were just like, no. Like I think they were like, we don't need it.
Wow.
We have so much business. We print money, which they do because they're super good and they're super popular. They're just like, we don't need this. Like, why let cameras into the back when we don't need it? And so they said no. But a lot of places say no. They just figure, we've been fine without it. Why rock the boat?
Wow, and it's called Johnny's Beef?
Johnny's Beef, Elmwood Park on North Avenue. Best beef in the world.
Listeners,
hands down.
Anyone in Chicago, are you listening from Chicago? You need to go to Johnny's Beef and tell them to talk to Lucas Peterson at Eater. I mean, my goodness, isn't all publicity good publicity? Whatever happened to that?
It's the best. They don't care. They got to line out the door every day. Doesn't matter.
Oh my goodness! Wow.
But it's the best.
Well, I love food, and I've actually taken pictures for a very long time of the food, and people have told me that that's kind of what they enjoy seeing from my trip photos as well. So I hear you. So first of all, can I ask you on a different topic? How do you think travel has changed since you've been covering it? In the years that you've been covering it, has it changed at all? Do you think?
Has travel changed? I mean, I think it has become more egalitarian, more accessible, as we've discussed. I think there is another side of that coin where we talked a little bit about airlines, where it has become a little bit of a race to the bottom. There seems to be an announcement every other day about, increasing the number of seats on planes and, expanding the premium cabins and really crunching people into the economy cabins. So I think that's the other side of it. But I would say it's generally positive. I'm going to be very interested, to see what's happened in the travel industry, when there's sort of some hard numbers on like tourism for 2017. Right. My sense is that the tourism industry is going to be very hurt, and that numbers, generally speaking, people visiting the U.S. and people leaving otherwise, I think that's going to be down. I think the hospitality industry in a lot of countries is already hurting for one reason or another, and I think it's a mixed bag. Travel really sort of is at the whims of whatever sort of the geopolitical climate is, whatever the economic climate is. But I really do think now, even though, you did mention the travel advisory for Europe, which is rather broad to issue that for an entire continent, though I understand there are concerns. I think Europe, generally speaking, is a safe place to travel to. And I would not hesitate to recommend it to anyone. But I think it's a good time to travel. And I think with social media and with the news cycles, I think things just happen a lot more quickly, for good and bad. And, people get wind of a great deal that's going around, and it goes around, super fast, and people can really jump on it. And then, if there's some sort of political crisis in a country or something that would make you maybe think twice about traveling to a country, that also gets around super fast as well. And so I think it just, like anything, it's just the internet and social media has really sort of accelerated the timeline for a lot of things, but particularly with travel.
Well, and I was just able to pull this up yesterday. Foursquare put out a study that international tourism has dropped sharply in the first quarter of this year, down as much as 16% to the United States since January, for political reasons, currency, economy, whatever kind of uncertainty you want to mention. But certainly there has been an effect. Now, of course, for travelers, that could work out well if you want to find bargains and cheap deals. One of the things we started at VoyageReport.com was an e-course to teach people how to find and book airfare deals. That's at VoyageReport.com/courses. So I think there are bargains perhaps out there for people to find in this type of environment. Have you been seeing that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and one of my favorite things to do is to just go on Google Flights, plug in some dates, and then just go to the map. Go to the world map and just look and see what the fares are all over the world. And that's one of
not be married to a specific destination. You're saying broaden out your scope. Yeah.
If you've got 10 days in August, go over to one of those sites. I like to use Google Flights. I find it pretty comprehensive. And then and you plug in the dates, and then you just go to the map, and you can see. It's a really good place. It's a really good way to find a deal. And it's a really good way to get sort of a lay of the land as far as what you can expect to pay. Because a lot of people are like, well, how much is this a good deal? I'm paying $1,000 to go to Paris. And is that okay? And the answer is, well, it depends. Like, maybe that's a great deal, but maybe that's not. And, so I like to employ that method to if I know I've carved out a block of time for a trip, then I can just sort of look over the entire world.
Perfect segue to tips for traveling on a budget. That's obviously one of them, the Google Flights search, kayak.com and Explore and all that. So let's give our listeners some tips that you may have, some of your favorites that you found pretty handy. Let's start off with tips for traveling on a tight budget. What would you recommend that people do or how they approach that?
Well, I would say if you're responsible, get a credit card. I think a lot of people... there's a lot of questions as to cash, credit card, traveler's checks. I don't really know people who use traveler's checks anymore. But if credit cards are not anything to mess around with, and people can, get into trouble. But if you know you can pay off your balance every month, get a credit card and get a good travel credit card. Get one of, whether it's one of the Amex products or one of the Chase products or the Citi product, they got a new U.S. bank card, just do it because it's free money. And there's a lot of great benefits that come with the card, from travel insurance to car rental insurance to trip interruption insurance to losing your baggage compensation insurance. There's just no reason
Lounge
not
access.
to do it. Lounge access. There's just no reason not to do it. And the benefits it provide are really, I think, extraordinary. So that's one thing. And I would say, as far as I like to eat on the street, but when I travel, I know that that's not for everyone, and I can't sort of heartily endorse it, because some people have sensitive stomachs, and there's certainly depending on where you are, there's certainly a chance of getting sick, and you have to be super careful. But I like to do it. I have found personally that the rewards outweigh the benefits, and you can get some real delicious, local, authentic food and it's extremely cheap when you eat on the street. And you pull up to whatever it is, if it is a taco stand, or if you're in China and it is one of those crepe stands, or if it's just buying some vegetables, like a sweet potato or something that's being baked right there on the spot, or an ear of corn. Obviously, fresh fruits and vegetables. Dairy, you want to be extremely careful. I think if you are new, or if you're sort of dipping your toes into eating on the street when you're traveling internationally, I would go with something that has been cooked pretty well. And I would not mess necessarily with fresh fruits and vegetables. But I like to do it. Sometimes it can really bite you in the butt, but it's an extremely inexpensive way to eat and to really get the local flavor of a country when you're traveling.
And what would you say for some of our listeners who may travel infrequently? Perhaps they haven't been abroad, or perhaps they're only going to go once or maybe even twice a year. Maybe they haven't been for a couple of years and they're considering about going. Do you have any tips for the infrequent traveler?
I would say visit a friend. I mean, I'm sort of not kidding. If you don't travel a lot, I guess I would wonder why the person was traveling then in the first place. If it was like, oh, I've always wanted to go to a certain place. But it's always helpful to have, someone on the ground, a little bit of local intel. I like to stay sometimes, if I am Airbnb-ing in a place, I like to stay with like a family, or with, an older couple or something. I've done this a lot of times with great success, like stayed with a retiree somewhere in some foreign country, they're renting out a room in their house because their kids have left, years ago. And man, that, I got to tell you, a lot of times that really works out, because they want to share everything with you. They frequently have time on their hands, enough to sometimes show you around, are full of a wealth of information and knowledge, and that works out really well. I think the rules are different if you are, unfortunately, the rules are different if you are male solo traveler versus female solo traveler. I think there are some things I know you do have to be more careful about, but I love doing that Airbnb thing. And I know people have mixed feelings about Airbnb, but I have found it extremely useful when I've traveled.
I agree. It's really been great for me. I think I stayed once at a clock tower in Stockholm, and I found somebody like you're describing in Seoul, South Korea, who we actually went to dinner. I mean, he just had a lot of time on his hands and was a great host, so definitely something to look at. Listeners, you can follow Lucas's adventures on Twitter at Lucas Peterson, and at Frugal Traveler, where they have more than 500,000 followers on that account. And on Instagram, I love this, Lucas, you're going to have to explain it, but his handle is Stale Twizzlers. Just exactly what you're thinking. Stale Twizzlers. Where did that come from?
I don't know. I really...
You made it.
I did. I think I was signing up for Instagram, and I saw someone had taken Lucas Peterson, to my chagrin. Mm-hmm. And I think I had a packet of... And I do enjoy chewing on stale Twizzlers. They get kind of like chewy rock candy, and that's sort of a weird thing that I like to snack on. So that's it.
That's the explanation. One day maybe you'll get your name back. But Lucas Peterson writes the Frugal Traveler column for the New York Times and is a host of Dining on a Dime on Eater. Lucas, thanks so much for being on our podcast.
Thanks a lot. It's been a real pleasure.
Listeners, what lessons have you learned from the Frugal Traveler? How have they changed the way that you've traveled? Let us know by rating this podcast, giving us a review, and sharing it on social media. We have guests every week talking about travel news and trends, so be sure to subscribe to our podcast. We'd sure appreciate your review. It helps bring more awareness to our journalism and original content. And if you have an idea for a future guest on our podcast, please reach out at voyagereport.com and let us know. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Mark Albert. Bon voyage.
You've been listening to the Voyage Report podcast. Get the scoop on travel at voyagereport.com.